Good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha Mirabal. I'm with Melco's application team doing our DesignShop Talk today. To see what questions you might have to get them answered. I have a few questions that were sent in ahead of time.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha Mirabal. I'm with Melco's application team doing our DesignShop Talk today. To see what questions you might have to get them answered. I have a few questions that were sent in ahead of time.
Good morning, everybody.
My name is...
Figure out where the noise is coming from. There it is. I found it. Okay. Cool. So there's Facebook, there's YouTube, and chat window. All right. Sorry about that. I forgot to mute both of the profiles before I started. All right. So anyway, I'll start with the questions that I was provided ahead of time. If you have questions while we're live, please type them in on the chat, and I'll see what we can get answered for you. All right. So both platforms, let me just quick check. There's Facebook and YouTube is live. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to close that and leave the chat window open. Great. All right. So let's go ahead and get going. Someone wants to see a segment on digitizing lace, so freestanding lace. So we'll start with that. And I did a little example beforehand right here. And we'll go ahead and digitize it so you can see. So freestanding lace is something that is done by digitizing on, well, ignoring the digitizing, how you sew it. You go get a stabilizer like a Vilene, a cut and wash, something like that. It's kind of a fibrous material. It looks like a kind of like a cutaway, because it is a cutaway, so it looks like that. But when you put it in warm water, it dissolves away, so it turns into a starch. So it's a wash away stabilizer. What I always do for these is I hoop 2 layers of that Vilene, the fibrous looking wash away. It's a cut and wash is what it's called. And then you're going to sew your design out. When it's all said and done, you'll go soak it in a warm water, and I usually do it until the stabilizer just goes away. Put it on something solid and dry it in a flat position, so the stabilizer that was there almost acts like a starch to hold the shape of it. So when it's all set and dried, you get like kind of a nice starched freestanding lace. Okay, so to digitize that, go away. How do I turn on the little focus thingy? There. I don't even know. Do not disturb is on yet. It's disturbing me. Weird. All right. So to digitize this, first, I decided I'd do a little earring for you all. All right. So when you're doing it, the key is first come up with what design you want, whether you have art. I just decided I was going to do like a 1-inch little earring that you can have a little circle here to put through one of the little things you get at the craft store to turn them into earrings. Okay. And I figured Mother's Day, why not do a heart? So when you're doing freestanding lace, the key to that is to make sure everything is tied together, that you don't just have stitches hanging out in the breeze, because what's going to happen if it's not connected, it's going to fall apart, right? So if you've got something that's radial, right, with just a bunch of stitches going out, all those stitches hanging out are going to fall down when you wash the stabilizer away. So making sure you think about the pathing, and that means think about how it's going to sew, making sure you're going over things. That's going to be critical here. All right. So before looking at the bottom, let's just kind of walk through it. So literally I did a walk, because what I want to do is make sure all of these go over a few times and that they're all tied together, so that when I go forward and do my satin stitches over it, they're all linked to the other elements, so it won't come apart, right? So this is just a walking stitch that I, drew my heart, and then I started going back and forth, continuing to tie all these elements together, right? So that when I come back to start where this element ends down here, then I can start putting on my satin stitches to go over it. Okay. Now with the satin stitches, it's a freestanding lace. I don't need to have really high densities, particularly because these are narrow columns and it's small, right? So similar to techniques that you would use on your small lettering, where you're going to have higher densities and things like that, you're going to use that same thing when you're talking about lace in small regions, right? So I did a density of 5.5, and that's kind of spreading these out, and kind of walk through it like a puzzle. I don't want any trims. This is all one color, and you notice there's no trims. So that means I'm paying attention to the starts and stops. So where the walk ends and I start my single line, I start there, go to there. Well then, next one, I've got to walk. So I follow along here. And the other thing to notice, my stitch lengths are a little bit smaller, right? So that's so I get a nice curve to it. And I've got enough penetrations and stitches so that when the satin stitch comes over, again, it gives you more foundation for those stitches, right? And then I've got my next satin that goes from here, covering up that stitch. Walk down, and then do this guy. This one I added later because I didn't like that there wasn't a line, so I really should have moved those up and done them ahead of time, but it doesn't matter. So I walked down, I did the walk stitch, and now my satin stitch going back over it. Started with a walk here, went down and up, and I went ahead and finished this side up so I don't end up with registration issues. All right. So then, now I'm going to come up, walk up to this, and do the satin stitch down. And then this guy here is another walk stitch, which is just this guy right here. And up and over. This one walks over here, and looking at that, I went too far. It doesn't have a trim, but I don't need it there, so I'm going to move it back. And now I've got this satin stitch. I'm going to walk down because all that's left is to finish my heart. So come down to where this one ended so I can start down here and run it over here. So then all I've got to do is put the little circle for where the earring will go through, right? So I've got to walk up. I've got to do a circle. So I run a circle around there, again with the stitch length smaller, 15. And then I do my satin stitch around. I made sure it overlapped these other stitches because I want it to tie. Although I've seen earrings where these are actually dangling up free and they work just fine too. So it's, how do you want it to be built? And then after this ends, I brought it back down to tie back for a little bit more security. And then I did a satin stitch over it. Again, do I need that? No, I just wanted it to cover up those stitches because I liked the satin look better. And that finishes it up. So when I was digitizing this, I did that first, and then I went, well, I kind of want a different color behind it. So I just drew a heart that goes first, so it's going to run under all that. And I did it like this. So if I go into the properties, I set the density to something large, and then for the underlay, I set the border margin to 0, the same density that you have here. I put on that underlay and set the stitch angle to 90. That way it's gives me that 90-degree crosshatch. And then the other thing I did is I set all the stitch lengths to something smaller. So 18 here and 18 there. And that's just because I wanted more needle penetrations to lock the top and bottom thread together in more locations. Okay. So I did that first and then do all this. So freestanding lace is really just a puzzle you got to work through. I've seen some designs that are very open and pretty. I've seen folks do confetti, which I think is really cool. I've made a bunch of them, of really small freestanding lace that they've, sew a gazillion of them onto Vilene, and then you wash them out, let them dry, and now you got confetti. I used to mail them in letters. I have lots of time on my hands to make random stuff. Seen bookmarks done with freestanding lace. Leaves and such on headbands. I've seen that. Bows. There's some really cute ears, wings on the back of items. So there's lots of stuff you can do with freestanding lace. And in the end, you're only sewing with thread. Okay. I do have people ask often, do I need to use the same color bobbin thread? It's a personal preference. If you use the same color bobbin thread as your top thread, it will look nice from both sides, right? If you use white or black bobbin on the back, you'll see a slight amount of that thread on the back. These are so small, you generally don't see it. So I'll say personally, when I'm doing tiny things, I don't bother. When I'm doing large things like a big bookmark or something like that, I try to match the bobbin where I can, and I just wind it on a simplicity winder that I bought a while back using the plastic cores. So I bought a long time ago, I bought Neb's bobbins, and as I used them, I cut the plastic cores, and then I saved them. So when I could wind by bobbins, I just wound them into those, what are supposed to be trash. So reuse. Anyway, so freestanding lace is really, it's not hard. It's just you got to think about it, because if things aren't overlapping, if you don't have all your underlay tied together before you sew, it's going to fall apart. Okay, so you got to make sure you go over things a few times before you go into those satin stitches on top. Okay, does that help any with lace? Hopefully. All right, we have a question typed in. How to digitize 3D in irregular shapes. Rounder and sharp corners, or I don't quite understand the question. When you're doing just any shape, it's just a matter of planning how you want it to look. So where you have points, so let's say, I don't know if you have an example. Well, I don't know if we want to do this heart as a 3D. So I'm going to move this up, make it a vector. Okay, so I got a vector heart. I don't like the overlap, but okay. So let's say we want to make that in 3D. You got to decide how you want it done, right? You can do this as a complex fill, open up stitch lengths, add a decorative pattern to it. So actually, let me go open one of those so you can see it. Nope, back. It was here. Puff, where's Puff? There it is. Like this. So this is a cute one. So notice this here is a complex fill set to the stitch type of satin. That's going to let you see those raised areas of the puff. But if you go into the properties, you'll see it's got a shape on it, right? So you can apply patterns, and that's just a pattern fill of ocean, and it's got the stitch directions around, which is why it's kind of swirling around there. So you can apply patterns by using your pattern fills, use decoratives. You want to make sure anytime you use these patterns fills, you're setting it to satin, and that will get those stitch lengths longer, so you get that nice curved rather than it hammering the puff to death, which kind of will squish it down more than you want. So you can always do things like that. But when you're doing these shapes, really you've got to think about these corners. You want to make sure you have needle penetrations all the way around, right? So, and what I mean by that is when it's sewing, you're stabbing it all the way around where you want the puff to cut. I don't want it to stop here and have no stitches on this corner, because then my puff will be hanging out there, right? So when you're doing things like that, let's see, notice right there, there's some stitches, that column, which is done this way to seal that up before it comes over it, because without that, I would have ended with a stitch here and here, which would have left no needle penetrations along this edge. So just to show you that, there's those stitches, right? So it does those stitches, you walk back over to your other side. Here, you cap that one for the same reason, because you need to get those, you need to cut the puff there, and then you come over with this and it goes side to side, and that gets you all the other edges. So anytime you're digitizing puff, it's just a matter of looking at what directions do you want the stitches going, how are you going to handle it if you've got stitches running this way, yet you've got a larger edge there to deal with, which means you've got to cap it or pinch the stitches over to the edge. So it's a planning exercise of how you want to handle those. And it is very unique to each design you do, right? So I can't say step 1, do this, step 2, do that. I can do it on a general basis, but, you know, stitch all your outlines, you know, do all your embroidery first and puff is last. Okay, that's easy. Well, when you're looking at the puff design, look at the edges And yeah, so if you're, the comment was typed in that, yeah, our digitizer often sends us designs that don't have those needle penetrations. They don't have those ends capped. So in those cases, I would question whether I would make sure the digitizer knows it was puff. And if they did, then point out that, hey, how are we dealing with these corners? Because without those caps, it's not going to work right. And I'm sure that's what you're seeing. You try to pull the puff off and it's still attached. You can cut it, yeah, all right, but then those stitches aren't covering up the edge and it doesn't look clean. It doesn't look pretty. So, if you have an X, so just since that's what you mentioned, right? So, stop. All right. Let's say that is, let me fix it real quick so it actually looks like it could be a puff design. All right. So let's say someone sent you this 1.8 and said, there's your puff design. And you go, okay, that's cute, except these edges, there's no needle penetrations here. So what do? Well, you can either tell them to fix it, or if you just want to fix it and be done with it, what would you do? Well, I know I need stitches that way. So I would just go grab a column and put some stitches under there, and now, and I can even have them stick out a little bit so that they're there and it's nice and clean, and do something like that, right? So now I've got that edge capped. I can take that, copy, paste, mirror, move it over here just because I'm lazy and like to optimize my time, right? So copy, paste, mirror, move that down. And let's see, I gotta move this one over a little bit. All right, so that's not bad. All right, so now what? I have all these caps, but I don't want a whole bunch of trims, right? So, and I probably overdid that. We don't need it quite that big. So I should have done that before I copied and pasted them 100 times, but going fast here. All right, just pretend they're right, okay? So here, I started there, I ended here. Well, now I want to walk down and over. So I'm going to take a walk stitch, kind of walk along the edge. You can go down the center if you want, but I usually try to stay to the edge because I don't want to crush all the puff. And then do this one, except my start needs to be where I just ended it. And let's end over here so that now I can walk down along this to, let's say, there. And then this guy, I want to move it up. Oops, and I made him too big. There. All right, so now let's make this guy start there, stop there, and walk to the last one. Do this last guy here. We're going to start that one there, end it here. And then the lettering, why don't we make it start there and end there? Woohoo! All right, so now I have an X that has the capped ends, and I fixed it, right? So if they sent me this and said, well, there's your puff design, and I went, well, not really. I could come in here, and now I actually have capped it so that when that sews, those ends will be closed up and you'll have needle penetrations all the way around it, so the puff will rip right off. The only other thing I didn't look at, had no underlay. I guess I could do an edge walk. There we go. On the actual letter. There you go. But really that I should. All right. Since I've spent all this time doing it, let's do it right. Okay. So before even this, I would want to do just a basic edge walk to hold this down. Why? You want to hold the puff, right? You don't want to sit there and have to hold your fingers in it until you're sure it's stable. All right. So you can do it as an edge walk. You do it just an easy center walk and call it done. But I did there's a walk, and where's this guy? There we go. All right, and now I can start that one there. Now I don't have any trims. So from there to there, and then this guy, I don't need the underlay. Now it's done. Okay. Let's see. Question about embroidering on marine vinyl. You don't want to drop the density too much. So I assume you don't mean you don't want to increase your density to where it's too spread out. But you're having issues with it being wholly along the edge because of the needle penetrations. Yeah, so with marine vinyl, it's a soft material, right? So, and if you stab it too much along there, it actually can rip away because you're tearing it. So make sure you're using a marine vinyl that has the nice fabric on the back. That'll help keep it together so you don't have to worry about it falling apart. I know there are others that have like a felt backing on it. I know personally I have not had good results with those. I just don't like that stuff. So I like the one that has the knit backing on it because it holds together nicer. Making sure you're not using a needle that's too big, because if you put big old holes in it, those are going to be more visible than if you're using a smaller needle. So using a 75 or even a 70. I don't tend to use 65/9s on it. I tend to use a 70 or 75. Seems to work pretty well. The other thing to look at is your digitizing. When you decrease your density, so that means you're adding stitches, yes, you get better coverage, but like you noticed, it tends to, you start risking the vinyl, right? So if you have a nice underlay that gives you I like to think of it as like you're painting a wall, right? So if I'm painting a wall and I put a white primer down and then I paint over it, or, something like that, the paint stays better. Well, when you're sewing, millimeters, you're gonna make me think. Point, I don't know what 0.95 is. What is that in points? I can't think on the fly. I'm sorry. I tend to use a 3.2, 3.3 point density, which is pretty dense, really, on vinyl. And then for underlay, having an edge walk. You're talking about the thickness of the vinyl, I think. 30 ounce is the weight of it. Yeah, setting wise on vinyl, how about this? Let's just look at that. If I'm doing text, right, and I want to sew that, typically what I'll do is set the density a little bit lower, because between 3.2 and 3.5 is typically where I tend to go. And then making sure you have a good underlay is going to make it where you don't have to keep on decreasing that density to get the coverage. Okay, so by having some stitches underneath there, by having the underlay, will really help. It'll really help you, right? So you don't have to decrease it. So there is a balance there, of not being too dense where you're ripping out, making sure your needle is smaller, so you're not using an 80 or a 90 needle. That won't work. Well, I mean, it will work, but you'll have big old holes. So using a 75 or even a 70 needle would work. And then making sure your underlay's there. That's what I tend to do the most, and it works out pretty well when working with it. And with the vinyl, the one with the knit backing, I like that stuff. So let's see. Our caps often have a rat's nest on the inside from 3D. So rat's nest on the inside, so you're seeing too much thread on the underside. So I would look at your settings on your machine, the act feed settings. Let's say you had it set to act feed of 40 for the puff. Well, maybe it needs to be 30. When you see too much thread on the back, your act feed is probably too high, right? So lowering your act feed some is where I would start with that. And then, of course, making sure your bobbin tension is right, because if your bobbin tension's not right, any adjustments on top, it's not good, because when you change a bobbin, it's going to change it. So make sure your bobbin's right first, and then effect change on top. So I would, instead of using a 40 or 50 or whatever you might be using for your active feed minimum preset, decrease that to 30, 25, somewhere over there, and see where you're at. Alexandra, did that help any? Edge walk on vinyl is also good, because that gives you a line of stitches, so when the top thread comes over, it's a nice straight edge that those stitches rest on, so it makes it look nice. Okay. What other questions? I don't see any typed in, so I'm waiting on type in ones. I'm going to pop over to this. So I did I think it was February 23rd, the DesignShop Talk for that. I answered this. So the question is, how do you do really big things with what we have, which is, let's say, a 15-inch square. It's bigger than that, but just for argument's sake, a 15-inch square sew space. How do you do things much larger? So you do that by using multiple hoopings and alignment, and I use laser alignment all the time for that. So on, I think it was February 23rd, I set up a file. What? Oh. I think it was the 23rd. 24th? Was around there. Alright, I copied the files over. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder. Sorry. So I copied over the folders. Oh, sorry. It was around the February 10th. So whatever Design Shop Talk is near the 10th, that's where it is. Anyway, I did this guy. And this is basically, went through how to set this up so that, this file, if I'm trying to do a banner, that is 46 inches long. So I've got us do multiple hoopings, and I like this big square hoop. So this is for each one how I was hooping it to be able to sew the letters. And I went through all of that in that DesignShop Talk. So let me go check. It was the 10th, maybe? There it is. Yeah, so it was the DesignShop Talk on February 10th. So check that out and see if that helps. Look through these, and if not, let me know, and I'm more than happy to, or let me know what you didn't quite understand or what you'd like to see a little bit different, and I can set up a new one for next time. Okay. Good morning, Lorena. Can I go over converting pictures to stitches? So there are a ton of resources out on how to use the graphic assistant. So we'll try to get you some links for those. I know even this week, they're on Melco's Facebook page. They posted out, here's a video on the graphic assistant. So what I would suggest is take a look at those and see if that helps first. If not, send whatever you're trying to work on over to applications@melco.com, and we can look at that specifically because, let's see. If I go to melco-service.com, and if you've not looked at the site, you should. There's the FAQ, convert. Let's see if I just search convert. Yeah. So I just searched for convert. There's the graphic to conversion assistant, and there's a training video, there's the features, there's some links here, and I'm pretty sure there's even more videos than that. I know Scott did one a while back, and that works really well. So let's see, very clever. Yeah, Gina, these colors, when I set this up, that was intentional. When I do this whenever I'm digitizing something that goes in multiple hoops. I will intentionally, do it all in one file and move the stuff around so I can set my registration marks and all of that. And then I color it intentionally, so when I have to break the files apart, I know what goes in one file and what goes in the next. And so I can keep track of the EL is what's going to sew on my second hooping. My third hooping is just the C. My fourth hooping is this green one. It's just going to be the O. The M and the E are individual hoopings as well. So yeah, I actually color them because it's easier for me to keep track of and to think about it, of what goes to what hoop when I'm doing it all in one file. I missed a question. What do you recommend on towels and puffy blankets for backing? Towels, I tend to use tearaway. So I overdo backing. So I'll be honest, I like lots of backing because I really don't like having that, if only I used one extra layer, or if only I used a heavier stabilizer. I hate those. I would rather just overdo it and know it sews well than have that, I know better, I should have done this. So I tend to use 2 layers of a heavy tearaway on towels. I like the crisp tearaway better than the soft tearaway. The soft tearaway, I don't have any in here. When you tear it, it leaves fuzz, which it's a tearaway. It's kind of a who cares, but the fuzz annoys me, and then I sit there picking it out, and that's just a waste of time and effort. Where the crisp, it tears cleanly. So I tend to use the crisp. The soft holds together nicer and doesn't risk as much of it coming apart if you have a heavy embroidery. So, there are benefits to both. As far as puffy blankets, if you're talking about like a minky or something that has a lot of texture, if it has any stretch at all, I don't know, it depends on what the material is and how stable it is. If it has any stretch, I tend to use, oh, that's interesting, Rick. Okay. So if it has any stretch at all, I would, if you don't want stabilizer there, I would go get a cut and wash, because that stuff washes out when you go to wash it. So the Vilene that you use for the freestanding lace, you can use that as well. Rick commented that he sometimes uses Solvay as the backing. That's not a bad idea. I know the topper Solvay is really thin, so that's not necessarily the best to use as a stabilizer. But Badgemaster is a Solvay-like material. It's thicker and it still dissolves, so it might just mean use multiple layers if it's not thick enough to hold the stitches. But yeah, that's not a bad idea either. To use something that dissolves, either be the Vilene or the cut and wash. Badgemaster, all of those are wash away stabilizers, so when it's all said and done, it washes out in the wash and it won't be there in the end. So that's not a bad idea. When you're doing stuff that has texture, putting a Solvay on top is always a good idea. It keeps the texture and the fur down so that when it's sewing, it doesn't, stick out through the embroidery or eat it. Okay. Another one was typed in, which tie-in and tie-out stitch do you think works best for you? I really like the style 5 tie-out. So the problem with I like it because it's super secure, and I don't like things coming apart, so I like secure. So that's great, but the downside to it is it's not good for all applications, right? So if I type text, let me zoom in on it, and go to properties, tie in and tie outs. Let's set it to a style 5 and apply. Okay, put it in 3D so you can actually see it. So while I really like the knot, would I use that with this font? Probably not, because you get these little tails hanging off. So style 5 is an X, so it doesn't come apart. It's great. It's super secure, but it's not ideal for all locations. Now, could I individually go move these and bury it? Yes. Am I going to do that? Probably not, if I'm honest. Probably not, but I could, and now those are all buried, so it'll be a dimple in the embroidery, but, the only people who notice that are us, the embroiderers, right? So, yeah, I could do that, or I can go get a knot style that is more embedded. So a style 1 is still secure, but it's in line with the sewing, so it's harder for folks to see. It does not tend to leave those little tails hanging off things. So I always try to use a style 5 when possible, and then switch to a style 1, because a style 1 is still super secure, but it's more in line, so it's less visible. So I don't use any of the others personally. I don't like the others. It's a personal preference. That's a me thing. I like style 1 and style 5, and those are the only two I use, period. So, and it's really, if it works well for what I'm sewing and the little tail is not hanging out or doesn't bother me, I always try for the 5. But more times than not, I'm using a style 1. So while I like the 5, 1 is what I use most commonly. Okay. All right, MK Buddy, hopefully that helped. Yeah. Okay, so those were all the questions I had ahead of time. Let me scroll through the comments and see if so we talked about the puff, vinyl, rat's nest, we did that, tie-in and tie-outs. Yeah. So Gino was saying that the Solvay, before Solvay, it was pretty common. I've done this as well in a pinch when I didn't have any Solvay. Um, you can use plastic wrap on shirts and when you're doing towels and things like that. So I've done that in a pinch. The downside is you got to pick it all out because it's not going to wash away, right? And then it stays in between your stitches, which isn't really a bad thing. But um, one of the biggest things that, yeah, particularly when sewing on towels, the loops, using a solvay on top stops that from being able to weasel its way up through the stitching. Because once the stitching's in, it's not going to come through because you've got your underlay and all those other good techniques. But while it's sewing, those loops can be annoying. So you want it to go in cleanly. So putting the solvay on top is really helpful. And then, of course, the primer stitch. That's really helpful for tapping down any of the loops or the fur if you're doing something on a, I don't know, the top of a stocking, a bear, something like that. So securing those fibers down so now they can't eat your embroidery or work their way up through the stitching is quite helpful. Oh my gosh, something's in my eye. Okay, what other questions? Because I don't see any others. All right. Well, I guess that's it for today. Next week I'm aiming for Friday. So we are getting towards the end of the school year, which is going to be a little bit hectic for me until the kids are out of school. So it might be bouncing between Thursday and Friday, depending on, stepping up ceremonies and award ceremonies and end of school excitement. But then they're home for the summer, so that's easy. Except my oldest now wants a job, so he wants to come sew for me, so that should be interesting. Anyhow, I hope you guys have a fabulous weekend. I'll be back hopefully next Friday. And until then, you guys have a great week. Sew some stuff. Let us know what you want to learn, and we'll try to work that in for you. All right. Bye, everyone.